Arthur considered himself a man of logic, a bulwark against the tide of superstition. His academic career, steeped in historical linguistics, had honed his mind to dissect facts, not entertain phantoms. The news of his great-grandfather Elias's estate, Blackwood Manor, had arrived like a peculiar artifact, intriguing but ultimately just another puzzle to be catalogued. He'd packed his worn leather briefcase, not with sentimental trinkets, but with research notes and a portable scanner, determined to approach the inheritance with the same objective rigor he applied to ancient texts. The journey itself was a descent into isolation. The paved roads thinned to crumbling asphalt, then to a pair of rutted tracks barely discernible amidst encroaching thickets. The air grew heavy, damp with the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves, and the sky above the winding canopy of trees seemed to press down, a bruised, indifferent gray. His sedan, usually so reliable, whined in protest, its tires spitting gravel as it navigated the increasingly desolate landscape. The further he drove, the more the outside world receded, replaced by an oppressive quiet broken only by the engine's drone and the rustle of unseen things in the dense undergrowth. Blackwood Manor loomed, not grandly, but with a weary, skeletal dignity. Its graying stone façade was mottled with lichen, and ivy clawed at the window frames like arthritic fingers. A gaping fissure ran down one corner, testimony to decades of neglect, and a single, shuttered dormer window on the third floor seemed to peer out like a cyclopean eye. No welcoming light glowed from within, only hollow rectangles of gloom. A shiver, not entirely from the biting autumn wind, traced its way up Arthur's spine. He pushed open the creaking iron gate, its rusty shriek echoing disproportionately in the sudden quiet, and stepped onto the overgrown path, the crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots unnaturally loud. The main door, a massive slab of oak studded with corroded iron, gave way with a groan that seemed to exhale the dust of ages. Moonlight, weak and watery, filtered through grimy leaded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the gloom. Every step Arthur took on the decaying parquet floor resonated, a lonely punctuation in the profound stillness. He moved from room to room, a methodical survey. Decaying tapestries hung like flayed skins, furniture lay shrouded under heavy sheets, resembling petrified ghosts. His academic instincts, however, were not to be deterred. He sought the library, certain to find some record of Elias's life, perhaps a clue to the manor's baffling reputation. It wasn't in the grand, obvious rooms. He found it tucked away, behind a cleverly disguised panel in what appeared to be a servant's pantry, a small, unassuming door that yielded to a firm push. This, he realized, was the heart of it all. This was the research station. A single, heavy oak desk dominated the cramped space, piled high with yellowed ledgers and scientific instruments he couldn't immediately identify. The walls were lined with shelves, not of typical literature, but of binders filled with meticulous, cramped handwriting and strange diagrams. On the desk, beneath a layer of fine dust, lay a stack of leather-bound journals. They were locked with tarnished brass clasps, but a small, ornate key lay beside them, almost daring him. Elias. His great-grandfather's name was embossed faintly on the spines. Arthur picked up the topmost journal. The leather was dry and brittle, the pages within promising an untold history. He felt a peculiar prickle of anticipation, a scholar's thrill at an untouched archive. He dismissed it, a scholar's reflex, as an anomaly of the old structure, perhaps a forgotten vent. He began to read, Elias's precise, looping script filling the page. The initial entries were mundane, observations on local weather patterns, inventories of obscure chemicals, sketches of unfamiliar flora.
But then, a subtle shift in tone, a creeping paranoia bleeding through the ink.
It brushed the very edge of his hearing, too indistinct to form words, too real to be his imagination.
Nothing.
Only the dust motes still dancing in the thin shafts of moonlight, now appearing to swirl with a strange, unnatural vigor. Arthur blinked, attributing it to tired eyes, the flickering light playing tricks. His rational mind scrambled for explanations, old house settling, drafts, optical illusions. Yet, a profound sense of isolation began to settle over him, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just alone in a decaying manor, he felt utterly singular, utterly exposed, a lone specimen under a microscope. And then, the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. Not from a specific point, but from everywhere, a pervasive, unseen gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of his rational mind, leaving him vulnerable, a fresh page waiting to be written upon. The determined academic, for the first time in his life, felt a tremor of something beyond intellectual curiosity. He was no longer just cataloging. He paused, rubbing his temples, the strange metallic tang now more pronounced. The silence in the room wasn't merely the absence of sound, it felt like a presence itself, a palpable weight that muffled his own breathing, made his pulse feel unnaturally loud. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint and fleeting, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor, too indistinct to form words. Imagination, he told himself, a byproduct of exhaustion and the unsettling material he'd been poring over. Yet, a sliver of unease had lodged itself beneath his skin. He returned to Elias's journals, the brittle pages now his sole preoccupation. His initial skepticism, a shield forged from years of academic rigor, began to crack under the relentless assault of his great-grandfather's meticulous, terrifying observations. Elias had not merely descended into madness, he had documented its architect. It latched onto the isolated, the fearful, weaving itself into their thoughts, subtly twisting perceptions until reality itself became a malleable, horrifying thing. One evening, as Arthur transcribed Elias's increasingly frantic script, a heavy volume on a nearby shelf toppled without warning, striking the polished floorboards with a concussive thump. He jumped, his heart lurching against his ribs. There was no draft, no tremor in the old house. He picked it up, a treatise on obscure regional flora, and replaced it, forcing himself to dismiss it as a structural shift, the settling of an ancient house. But the incident resonated with Elias's earlier entries, which spoke of objects subtly displaced, of books found open to specific, unsettling passages. Elias believed it had subtly influenced his ancestors for generations, a silent predator cultivating its hosts. Arthur devoured the entries, his sleep becoming a fractured landscape of disturbing visions. He found pages filled with crude, intricate diagrams, geometric patterns, symbols he didn't recognize, and what appeared to be incomplete schematics for a containment device or a ritual circle. His scientific detachment, once his anchor, now felt like a fragile veneer. Was that the wind rattling a window pane, or something else? He was succumbing, just as Elias had. Driven by a desperate need for external validation, Arthur sought out the local research station in the nearby town. The building, a quiet, unassuming brick structure housing archives and historical records, offered a stark contrast to the decaying manor. He requested access to old land deeds, family histories, and local newspaper archives concerning his ancestral line. The archivist, a stoic woman with spectacles perched on her nose, retrieved dusty ledgers and brittle newsprint. Arthur spent hours poring over them, his fingers stained with ancient dust.
Several generations of his family had entries ending abruptly, or simply stating relocated without trace, or died under unusual circumstances with no further details. When he pressed the archivist about these gaps, her answers became evasive, her gaze shifting away. She spoke of local peculiarities and incomplete records, but her discomfort was palpable, a silent confirmation of a history deliberately obscured. Elias's final, almost illegible entries were not just a record of his own demise, but a direct warning. The entity didn't just infest houses, it targeted individuals, those with the inherited sensitivity, those already predisposed to its influence. Faint and formless, like dry leaves skittering across a distant, forgotten pavement. He leaned closer, straining, the metallic tang in the air now a coppery bloom on his tongue. It wasn't a sound from the house, it was a sound of the house, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in his bones. The silence deepened, became a thick, oppressive blanket, muffling the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen things in the overgrown gardens. His great-grandfather's journal lay open, its brittle pages whispering secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The floorboards above groaned, a slow, deliberate complaint, and a gust of frigid air snaked through the room, though all windows were sealed. He was being called. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the stone fireplace. He ran his hand over the rough-hewn mantel, feeling a strange vibration, a low hum beneath the surface. It was a sensation of deep, ancient machinery, or perhaps something far older, far more alive. The whisper intensified, a chorus of faint, dry rustles that seemed to emanate from within the hearth itself. He hesitated, his breath catching in his throat, then knelt, pushing aside a heavy brass screen. The air that wafted up was thick with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else, a cloying sweetness, like decaying orchids, mixed with a sharp, metallic tang that made his teeth ache. He descended, each step echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The walls were rough-hewn stone, clammy to the touch. The passage opened into a larger, circular chamber, its existence clearly a secret, kept from all but a select few. This was no ordinary cellar, this was a dedicated space, a hidden sanctum of Elias's obsession. This, he realized with a sickening lurch, was the manor's private research station. The circular room was low-ceilinged, the stone walls covered in faded, frantic scrawls. Diagrams of intertwined symbols, crude anatomical sketches, and dense, indecipherable script covered every surface, illuminated by a single, flickering gas lamp still attached to a pipe, somehow drawing light from an unknown source. A heavy, iron-bound table stood in the center, littered with desiccated samples, tarnished surgical tools, and a stack of journals, older than the one he held, their covers warped and stained. He picked up the topmost journal. Elias's familiar, elegant script quickly devolved into frenzied, almost illegible chicken scratches. He had been trying to understand its mechanism, its specific lineage preference, and, ultimately, how to transfer it. The ritual, Arthur now saw, was not for exorcism, but for succession. Elias had failed to break the cycle, he had merely sought to control it, to pass it on to a new, unsuspecting host, a new custodian for the entity. And the final, terrible implication struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. Elias had passed it on to Arthur's grandfather, then his father, and now, it was Arthur's turn. The entity was not merely influencing the manor, it was a parasitic presence, a living legacy within his family line, cultivating the perfect host through generations of quiet despair. He gripped the journal, his knuckles white. The choice, stark and horrifying, lay before him. Or he could fight, try to destroy it, though Elias's desperate notes hinted at the impossibility, and the immense personal cost. The air grew heavy, thick with the entity's presence. He saw a flicker of movement at the periphery of his vision, a gaunt figure, just beyond the reach of the gaslight, its face obscured, but its posture one of utter, silent despair. It was the face of a host, perhaps. Elias himself, or one of the others. "Embrace the quiet," Arthur screamed, a raw, ragged sound that tore from his throat, echoing off the stone walls. He slammed the journal shut, its cover thudding dully. He wouldn't be another link in their chain. He wouldn't pass this on. He wouldn't succumb. The lamp shattered, spraying shattered glass and sparks across the ancient stone. Arthur collapsed, gasping, clutching his head as if to hold his very sanity together. The air was filled with an acrid stench, a burning sensation that seared his nostrils. He lay there, curled on the cold stone, shaking uncontrollably. The entity was still there, he knew it. He could feel its malevolent hum beneath the floor, in the very walls. He had not destroyed it. He had merely, perhaps, wounded it. He had bought himself time. But at what cost? The cycle was not broken. It had merely found its next, unwilling custodian.